Hi, Tracy Hugelmeyer here from VintagepreneurUniversity.com, where I help vintage sellers start, grow, and scale their business on Etsy. I also own my own vintage business on Etsy that I've had since 2013, Rustic Eye. And today I'm so super excited to bring you a brand new edition of Friday Feedback, where I give a new review every Friday to one of the Etsy Junkie volunteers. And it's completely free. If you want to find out how you can get your own free review, there are just two requirements. One, you need to be an Etsy junkie, and I show you how to do that in the notes below, so check that out. Two, you have to sell vintage on Etsy. Those are the only two requirements. All right, so without further ado, I'm super excited to introduce you to today's volunteer, the lovely Tricia of Slow Fashion Woman. So let's go ahead and I'm going to jump behind the screen and we'll visit her shop and get started. Okay, so here we are in Tricia's shop, Slow Fashion Woman. She has been on Etsy since 2017 and has had 565 sales. That is awesome. I noticed that she's not using a banner, which is totally fine. You do not need a banner just for the sake of having a banner. If it works better for your brand to have a clean look like this, then that's perfectly fine. And the same thing when it comes to featured items. I think those are good things to use if they add to your brand, but they're not absolutely necessary, and it can work just fine without them. You also have a lot of items for sale. That's a lot of work. You should be proud of that. You have over 1,000 items listed. That's amazing. In general, when it comes to how many items that you should have listed on Etsy, it's going to be different for every business. Some businesses are going to do better with 1,000 or more listings, and other businesses are going to do fine with a strategy with not as many listings. So it just comes down to your strategies, and typically the more listings that you have, the more chance you have of being found. But that doesn't just happen on its own. You also have to, of course, have good search engine optimization, and your shop has to make sense. The items that are in there have to make sense. In Tricia's case, she has all patterns, so she has niched down to just patterns. I love that. Having a very targeted niche like that is going to make so many things easier for her business. So while there are plenty of very successful eclectic shops, and that in itself is not at all a bad thing, having a micro niche like this can really help you if you're struggling with, who to target your products to, like on social media and things like that. Generally speaking, targeted niches are the way to go, but that does not mean that if you sell a wide range of things that you can't also be successful. It just comes down to your strategies. The last thing that I want to add there is a lot of times I see vintage sellers think that the way that they're going to get the most sales is by adding more items. And so that becomes their entire strategy, just to add more items. That strategy in and of itself is not going to give you a successful business. Like I said, you have to have all the other components. And I always say to add thoughtfully and strategically, rather than just to list, because that in and of itself is not going to be an effective strategy. So hopefully that makes sense. So before you list something, here's one simple trick. Just ask yourself, does this item align with my brand, or am I listing it just because I got a good deal on it and I want to try and make a profit? In the long run, staying true to your brand is going to get you more sales than if you aren't staying true to your brand. Now, Tricia is clearly staying true to her brand here. She is staying true to her niche. She is only listing vintage patterns. So that is super cool. I would recommend for your photos, which are super on point as far as they're simple, they're straightforward. You can tell what you're going to get first glance. The only thing that I would recommend for your photos really at all would be just to brighten them up a little bit. And there's a really simple trick that I use for that. I'm going to link to the video, another review that I did for another Etsy Junkie that just shows really quickly how to use a free app to do that. So you can check that out. as well. It's especially good for white backgrounds like she uses. It just kind of brightens the photo and brightens that white background right up. So check that out. Here's something that I did want to point out. I think that this is really cool to look at. And I'm going to show you this in my own shop as well. I'm not picking on Tricia here by any means. It's true with pretty much everybody, myself included. If you go back through her by way of her reviews and look at her first photos, you can tell the improvements, just by looking at these older photos. Back in 2017, her photos are, definitely more thought out now. These were kind of off center, or not, not off center, but off the thumbnail, so you can't see the whole pattern. I really like the way that you have kind of changed those, and now you're showing them the whole pattern, and you're doing it on the white background. So this is just showing how people pretty much, it's very normal to, over time and just by practicing, get better and better at your listing photos. Let me show you what I mean in my own shop. So I went here to my original photos in 2013, and you can see I just did a lot of upcycling in the beginning. So you can see with those first sales, how my photos were. They weren't good. They're off the thumbnail. I really believed back then in taking photos outside. I thought that was the best way to get natural or light in general, and that just isn't true in most cases. So I was all about taking my photos outside then, and these photos are, just not very good. And so I wanted to show you that that is completely normal. And fast forward to my photos today, and they're a little bit better. They're not perfect. I don't claim to be the best photographer ever, but they're much better than they were initially. And that was completely just by practice, by trial and error, and by finding what worked. Okay. Right here is an example of one of my photos where I use the app that I'm showing you in the video that I'm linking to brighten up my photos. So this is a white background. It definitely would not look like that if I didn't use this app. Here's another example. So that is something that I would recommend that you check out. You could probably bring these, and this isn't something that I would spend too much time on now, but just moving forward, you could maybe even play around a little bit with bringing your photo a little bit closer to the frame, your patterns, because you have a little bit more space here. I would still leave a little tiny bit of a border around it, but if you cropped it just a little bit closer, then you could see the pattern a little bit closer in a search, and that would probably be a little bit better for you as well. But in general, I think your photos are great, and they just need a little bit of brightening up. Okay. Tricia also has a pattern shop on Etsy, so I want to look at that really quickly. Here is her pattern shop, and I do notice that she uses this cute graphic. You can tell she's really put a lot of time into her branding, and I know that she's recently done a rebranding, so that really shows. I love this graphic a lot. It fits perfectly with her logo and, the theme of her niche. So I would recommend maybe even playing around with bringing this into your banner. I think that could be really cute as well. The one thing that I wanted to point out on your pattern shop is I don't use pattern personally, but I wanted to show you that this little line at the top, I think the purpose of it, and I'm guessing because I don't use pattern, but I think the purpose of it is to allow you to include a link to perhaps like a mailing list if you have it. I'm not positive on that, so don't quote me. And you used it to put, a message there, a really good announcement message. But the problem is when I clicked on it, it gave me an error. And then when I clicked on go back to pattern, Etsy directs me to how I can get my own pattern shop. So that's not good for you and your business and keeping customers on your shop. So look into that. I didn't love that for you. So if you can change that little banner, I had to get creative about how I got back to your shop. I had to do a couple back arrows there, but I don't love for you that if somebody were to click on this, it's going to completely lead them off your site. That's not good for you. So see if you can change this to have a link that goes back to your shop, or ideally your shop, or if you're not directing them to an email list or something like that. Okay. But other than that, I didn't want to spend too much time on your pattern site, although I think it's lovely as well. I wanted to spend most of the focus on your Etsy shop. I just didn't want to, I wanted to make sure to point that out to you. All right, so back to your vintage, or your Etsy shop. This tagline here is super cute. I'm loving it. This vintage patterns plus modern fabric equals style perfection. I love, love, love that. The only problem is this isn't where you want to put this, because you are missing an opportunity here to include more of your shop keywords in your shop title, which will help to optimize your outside search engine for outside search engines such as Google. Google's the big one. So vintage patterns, of course, is perfect, but you might want to put in there some more specifics. I notice you have a lot of adult. It looks like a lot in the adult category. So you might want to put adult and, adult vintage patterns, child vintage patterns, or adult vintage patterns and, craft and quilt patterns, or whatever, you feel are the main keywords that describe what your shop carries. That's what should be here in this section. And then don't get rid of that tagline, but put it in other places in your shop. Like if you add a banner, you can put it there. You can put it on your listings, in your about section, anywhere else. When you send out, inserts in your packaging, definitely include it there, because I love it. It's super cute, but just not the best place for it. Okay. I noticed that Tricia is using free shipping on her patterns. The niche that she has, it's probably very simple for her or it was very simple to her to transition to free shipping. With most vintage sellers, it's much trickier, but she's lucky to have a niche. And maybe it's strategically where she's able to include that free shipping and get the perks that Etsy has told us come along with that. So that's probably a very smart decision for your business and your particular shop. Now I've jumped down here to Tricia's About section because there's something that I wanted to show you that I thought was very interesting and kind of cool. So Tricia has chosen a strategy that, first of all, she goes into how, how her mother and grandmother taught her that good patterns are timeless, telling a little bit of her story about that. And that's just really sweet and special and is a great piece of her story. But the pricing piece is what I wanted to talk about, because here she talks about how she's chosen not to research individual prices and instead keeps her prices static based on, the date of the pattern. So she has chosen a different strategy than a lot of vintage sellers. A lot of vintage sellers will, put a lot of time and effort into researching the age of items and their value and that kind of thing. But she's actually adopted a different strategy. And what I want to say about that is there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with researching prices either. But her strategy is allowing her to, like she says, not put her focus into that research and instead just kind of keep it as a static price. And I think that is an interesting strategy and could actually work quite well for her. I think that some vintage sellers would probably frown on her for this, but I'm actually saying that I'm on her side with this strategy. And I think that there's a place for both strategies. There's a place for the vintage sellers who are very, very careful about pricing their items. And there's a place for the vintage sellers that take a different approach, and they're, maybe just, whether it's decor or, something like this, patterns, they're not worrying about so much the value of it from a history or antique perspective, but more a value, a market value. So, if it's a decor item, maybe they keep their pricing around $20, $20 to $30. For example, I'm just throwing a number out there, but it's not about the value of the item more so than the market value. So they're similar and they overlap in a lot of ways and many times, but sometimes they can be different too. But when I do these reviews, I like to look for different things that everybody can learn from each particular review. And so I hope that helps not only the seller, but everybody else who is watching these reviews, so that you can pick up on, different things that can help you with your own shops and find value from all the reviews. So Tricia, I think that it can only help you if you eventually want to add some photos in your about section to help illustrate your story a little bit more, because I think this is really cool. Maybe pictures of your mother or grandmother or you with them, when you were a child, would be really kind of go along with this story and would be great to add to your about section when you get a chance. I know I need to do some work on my about section as well. So sometimes when I give these reviews, I'm coming up with my ideas for myself too. So, we all always have things to learn, and can and should always be looking at ways to improve too. Alrighty, so I chose just picked her first item to review, this lovely pattern here. And keep in mind, I know nothing about patterns, but I'll still do my best here to review this. All right, so we've got a bunch of photos to show the different things that you would expect to see about this pattern. I don't know how important it is to see a pattern opened up, maybe a little bit more. But if it's not important, then maybe that's not necessary, but maybe it's just something you could consider. If that's something that people would want to see, you might want to show the pattern opened up. If they don't care, then by all means, don't waste your time doing it. Your customers the best, and what they, what they're asking for and what they like to see. I love this photo. I recommend that whenever you can, bring a branding photo into your listing photos, because this helps reinforce your branding. And all she's saying here is free USA shipping on all sewing patterns. Someone can see that she has free shipping, but this reemphasizes that as well, which is very smart. And whenever you can bring in branding, sometimes on Etsy you have to get very creative about how you do it. So doing it in a listing photo like this is super smart. So love that. And as far as the item title here, everything looks good there. You're including the most important search information. The only other thing that I might recommend is if you have patterns where, and maybe you're doing this, I haven't looked at all your patterns, but if you have patterns that are good for a specific purpose, that could be another thing that you could add to your titles. Like, for example, party dress pattern might be a good keyword phrase to use in your title and or tags. And as far as what you include first here, you want to include the most important information. That best. How are people searching for your items, and make sure that you make it very clear what it is, which you do. The only thing I'm questioning here is whether you should put this information, this Vogue 4963-1959 later on, or if you should leave it there. And again, you're going to know that best, but what is the first information that somebody is going to want to see when they are looking at a pattern? And as long as you have that first, then you're good to go. So that looks pretty good to me. And like I said, maybe you could add here pattern for party dress pattern or something like that. I also see like garden parties, so maybe garden party dress pattern. Just a suggestion of how to add, if you're looking for something to add here, you're not sure what to put. But as far as optimizing for Etsy search, it looks like you're doing that. 2 to 3 long tail keyword phrases is what Etsy is currently recommending. So that's right on par there. Okay, taking a look at your item description, I really like how you're using sections here to break down the information. So you have your about the sizing, the shipping, the this here hunting for a specific sewing pattern, product condition. That's really a great way to help a viewer, a customer, get through the information here and still include all the information. So it's organized in a really good way. The only thing that I would recommend is this information here. If you want to just list it out, I would probably do it with bullets, using some type of bullet point and maybe putting it down a little bit further and using this first part here to talk to your customers in a natural way. So this isn't quite keyword stuffing, but it's right on the verge of keyword stuffing. So what I mean by that is outside search engines specifically, as far as we know, at this point in time, Etsy does not look at our item descriptions for a search purpose, but we do know that outside search engines like Google do, and they do not like keyword stuffing, which basically means including all your keywords in an unnatural way that's not written for humans. So a lot of times you see that with like, just listed out with commas and spaces. But here you're kind of keyword stuffing, just doing it on different lines. And the outside search engines might have an issue with that. And I would just, like I said, just use this first part because the first part of your description is the most important part for outside search engines. So even if you move that down just a little bit and put, something that's going to spark emotion in your customers. That's and including those keywords, but in a natural way. So a little blurb about how much fun they would have, wearing this dress to a summer garden party. And then, some way to help them imagine that in their lives, and then sprinkle your keywords in there strategically. Okay, and then obviously it's going to be super important to include this information about the sizing. I would probably take out "I urge you" and instead say something like "please keep in mind." That's just spinning the "urge you" part, and making it a little bit more positive. Another way you could say it is when selecting a vintage pattern, it's very important to keep in mind that sizing has changed over the years. That's another one too. Another way you could say it. It's the "urge you" that I'm getting a little bit less than a positive vibe about. And whenever you can tweak things and make them more positive, the better when it comes to selling your items, especially in a listing description, because that's when someone is making their decision whether they want to buy your product or not. So it's always a good idea to choose your words very carefully. Here is another kind of example of this. So the fit is up to you and solely your responsibility. Now, while we know that that's the case, we still can spin that just a little bit so it doesn't make a customer be like, oh, wait, whoa, I don't want to take on that responsibility. I'm just going to bounce and not buy this. Instead, maybe you can say something like, using the measurements is the best way to ensure a good fit. Please ask me if you have any questions. I'm always happy to help. So you're still saying basically the same thing, but you're letting the customer know that they're welcome in your shop and that it's a place that they want to stay and stick around. It's kind of a subconscious thing because you're not telling the customer to leave, obviously, but when somebody sees kind of a negative spin on the way things are worded, subconsciously, they might decide this is not where I want to stick around. And so just by making little tweaks, you can actually increase the amount of time somebody spends on your site. You can increase your sales that way as well. So just a little tip to try. Okay, so I have to say this, don't hate me, but I did click on your policies and I realized that you don't have your policies set up, and you probably know this, but, well, except for the payments, but you don't have the rest of the policies, like if you accept returns and things like that. So I highly, highly recommend that you add that or consider adding that. It can actually affect your placement in search. Etsy has told us that if we have our policies completely filled out and we're using the template that they provide, then that will give us a little bit of boost in search. So you want to make sure that you do that, and also having your return policy and your exchange policy and everything in your policies is only going to help you, because it's going to make customers feel more comfortable purchasing from you. Now, obviously, not every customer is going to look at your policies or care, but there are some who will, and if they don't see them there, it could deter them from making a purchase. Okay, a last little bit with your tags. I think you have some great tags here. You're including all the important information, or a lot of important information. Some ideas that came to my mind when I was thinking of, what tags that you could be using for your patterns, in addition to things like party dress or garden dress. I don't know. Take a look at this. I'm just kind of throwing it out there, but I wonder if people use vintage patterns for paper ephemera purposes. And if so, maybe you can include that tag word or that keyword in your tags, in some of your tags, not necessarily every listing, but some of your tags, to perhaps get a little bit more traffic that way for people looking for vintage paper ephemera, because you could use these in crafts. It would be super cute. So just a little thing that you might want to look into there. And on a final note, I think your shop is amazing. You have your sales and your reviews. I haven't even talked about your reviews yet. All kinds of amazing reviews. Your results speak for themselves. So be very proud of your shop and how far you've come. And, the things that I've suggested today are just little tweaks that are only going to help you. You already have a great foundation. And thank you so much for volunteering your shop. I will link to Tricia's shop, not only on Etsy, but also her pattern shop, so you guys can go check her out. I really appreciate it. And that wraps up today's Friday feedback. Thanks again, Tricia. I super appreciate you volunteering your shop. Again, if you would like to get your own free review, how you do so is down below in the notes. You can become an Etsy junkie 2 ways, either by joining our free Facebook group or taking one of my free trainings. All that information is down below for you. And thank you so much for joining me today. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and click the little bell as well so you get notified whenever a new video comes out. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.